what in a textbook?
that Jesus Christ was resurrected. You won't find that stated as fact. There's no consensus on that.
Right, all we have is testimony. So what you're
Yeah.
gonna find in history, in a history book that's trying to like not make any metaphysical or religious claim or proposition, is what it's gonna say is there was a man named Jesus of Nazareth that was a historical person, and Christians claim that he was the son of God, he died, and then he resurrected. That's what it'll say. So when I look into the sources that the Christians have, I find it historically reliable. It speaks to my conscience, and therefore I follow Jesus. I believe so. I take on right their propositional truth claims, like Jesus is the Son of God, and I take it as my own.
Why? Just because you believe the testimony?
Yeah, because I believe the testimony.
Um. Okay. Well, I find it to be. I mean, I don't take this personally. Well, you probably will. I just don't believe in magic.
I mean, it's fair for you to just kind of assume that it's magic, right? That's fine. But all I would say is, I mean, I find that a bit reductivist, but I mean, it's fair play if that's how you want to treat history.
Um. You wouldn't consider walking on water magical?
Well, yeah, but that's not the crux of the belief. The belief isn't like, oh, okay, well, I have to observe people walking on water. It would go, do I believe that it's historically reliable that this guy named Jesus Christ that was a real person? And Christian said that he said these things about himself, like he literally said that he was God. He was with God from the beginning of the world, or from before the beginning of the world. Then I believe that what they're saying about what Jesus said about himself and what people said about him to be true, then I believe he's the Son of God. If he's the Son of God, then yes, those things are possible. Magic is possible.
How many people said that?
Hmm?
How many people said that?
What do you mean, how many people said it?
How many testimonies do you have?
Enough people for it to circulate for the community to grow, and for people to die because of their belief.
How many is that?
I have no idea.
Is it like, is there an estimate?
I actually
Because
don't
you
know.
said you said you read the testimonies.
Yeah.
So how many did you read?
I mean, of the authoritative sources, that's basically the New Testament, right? New Testament, and then you can start reading like secondary sources that come from like the communities of like of specific apostles, because like all we know from history is they kind of like went out and they spread after the Pentecost and set up all their churches. So those churches and communities are there. We have the secondary sources for those communities, and they circulated particular writings within those communities. But by the end of the first century, most of the writings that you see in the New Testament like were in circulation across all the churches, so they spread pretty quickly.
Um, so other people were believing the testimonies.
Yeah, that's the idea, right? Christianity
Yeah.
spread far and wide.
How many
So,
testimonies were there though? Like, whether well, is there like a ballpark estimate of how many really uh, respected testimonies there are?
yeah, so by testimony, do you have a narrow view of what you would consider testimony? Does it have to be written testimony?
Um, well,
Right,
how would
that's the
you
crazy
know?
thing, right? Like most of the time you wouldn't find someone as authentic based merely on what they say, right? It would have to do with, what they do, right? That's usually the pejorative saying. Even if you want to prejudice a bias based on the assumptions that we hold in our present day or contemporary context based on conventions, I mean, you'd say the same thing, right? So we could at least say that much about, you know, the way in which we're gonna like establish, what's one set of verifiability versus another. Couldn't you say that the actions of those who claim to be Christians, even in the first century, would speak louder than what they actually said? Like
Um,
another idiom, right? Like a picture tells 1,000 words or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, all I'm being critical of is the reason why I'm just asking is because, you know, the least one could do if you wanted to start being intellectually honest about like quote unquote the sources themselves is to like basically have like the same standard or criterion of truth that you would for anything else.
Well, for anything else, like the reason I know the Earth is round is because there's scientific consensus on that. I didn't go to
Yeah,
space, and
it's because
you
right,
know,
because I mean, until like we actually had photos, right, of like satellites and stuff, I mean, we had scientific consensus. But again, the way the scientific method works is it works from particular axiomatic premises, and then, you know, it makes a whatchamacallit, a hypothesis or like a best working theory for how we're going to explain the causality or the motion of the thing that's observed. Because the hypothesis is about what is causing it. Does that make sense? And then we test that theory, right? It could be right or wrong. We can modify the theory, and then we come to a consensus based on the conclusions that's reached, right? So at the end of the
yeah,
day, right, it's not a proof. You see what I mean? It's not an empirical proof that we
It's a
arrive at.
theorem.
It's a quote unquote consensus. You see what I mean?
yeah.
Now, right, so if you want to try to relate to how this has to do with like historical reliability, establishing historical reliability is going to work from the same axiomatic premise that a scientific method does. In the broadest sense, science referring to like inquiry, right? So we're going to have the same analytical approach, right? But here our like object of study isn't going to be like the natural world or our observations necessarily. It's going to be texts and secondary references. Because history, more broadly speaking, is always established, or the meaning of what the history is or those events are have to be interpreted anagogically, okay, relative to other things, right? Within that particular time period, or you know, if the sources are scarce, then you know we're going to have to modify our assumptions based on you know the proximity or the
But what's the
proximity of
main?
other
What's
interconnected texts or interrelated events, etc. Right? So that's what is meant by establishing reliability anagogically. So clearly, the process itself is going to have a gradation of probabilities, right? So in that sense, you could have some sort of scholarly consensus about what kind of views or ways of looking at those events or reported events in history as being more reliable than other points of view.
okay? So I'm just curious, because I don't actually go through primary sources to figure out how the world works. I pretty much rely on institutions and institutional knowledge to know that if I
Right.
get in my
So those would
car,
all be like appeal to
Oh,
authority in that sense.
whoa, let him finish. Let him finish, please.
Right. So you wouldn't be able to in any
God
intellectually honest sense call
bless it.
yourself a scientist. You get what I'm
wait,
saying?
wait, wait, wait,
But
wait,
we
wait,
all
hold on,
recognize this, right?
hold
And
on.
so pejoratively, colloquially, like we'll usually, you know, say that, "Oh, well, I'm taking the science
He's not
seriously," or
listening.
I'm using a scientific approach because I'm taking for
Yeah,
granted the
I
authority
understand,
of the
I
scientific
understand.
All right, what
consensus.
do you think about fucking that spear that they had, Lagunius's, right? Like, I mean, dude, that they had like what, like four false ones that they found. Like, I don't know, dude, but it's like if you go to the church, they said, "Oh yeah, this is totally legit."
Yeah, true.
I mean,
So
okay, yeah, I'm having a hard time tracking.
I,
wait, 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 wait. Can I just when you go to a restaurant, how do you know
Mhm.
you're not being poisoned?
What's that?
When you go to a restaurant, how do you know you're not being poisoned?
Um, there's more probability than not because, you know, in our current convention, like we have, you know, health codes, certain regulatory, you know, criterion
if
by
you
which
do you read those
restaurant
like little
operation
papers
of
on their walls,
restaurants
like if
are
it says
approved. So, you know,
85%, or
there's going to
like they got an
be some
85
sense,
out of 100.
so there's going to be some sense of like implied um trust, right? That's established by those same conventions.
Yeah, you're
You get
just
what I
yeah,
mean?
but
So,
wouldn't you just
so
be appealing to
yeah, yeah,
authority
yeah.
though?
So this is a good analogy, right, for how historical reliability could be built, right? How our assumptions about what happened in the past could be built based on like a probability schema from an analytical approach.
Wait, so how do you like you're appealing to the FDA, right?
Well, okay, so now are you trying to justify the appeal to authority or something?
Yeah, that's how we know things.
No, actually not. So
Okay, how do you know the
it's a
Earth is?
logical fallacy. I mean, the whole
No,
COVID
it's not.
situation is proof positive, right? So here's the thing. Right, but those conventions that we have are built on assumptions, right? Either built from the past, whether they're an institution or an organization. There's like a chain of, there's going to be like some sort of chain of custody of assumptions, right, that we hold about these institutions, right? So those are kind of at play if one takes it as a mere de facto truth, right? That because the authority exists, that nothing they could say could be wrong is going to be incoherent and inconsistent with
Yeah,
those same
everything
assumptions. Hold
everything is
on, with
probability.
those same assumptions
Oh shit.
that built those institutions or organizations in the first place. That's to assume that how the institution was built, like built their credibility, was based purely off of that authoritative principle rather than a scientific one.
Yeah, everything's probability. I know. You can't just
Right. So
100%.
so that's
Yes,
what
I
I'm
know.
saying. You can't just try to
That's it.
justify, right, an appeal to an authority because we have authoritative or somewhat conventionally speaking authoritative
Yeah, I know.
institutions or
But
organizations.
it's a nothing statement. This just
They're
seems like
no
a
no 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 no. Well, what you're making is a nothing statement,
no.
is
It's
what I'm
not.
saying.
No, wait. So
It
wait. Go
is.
go through it
Because
again.
because
Wait
no
wait.
one because I'm not the one trying to be foolish enough trying to justify an appeal to an authority
Wait. So
without acknowledging the underlying assumptions, right? The foundational assumptions which
I
everybody that goes to school and is educated is expected to hold, right? When
yeah I
we
understand.
interact or apply, those, the provisions of those authorities at any given time
I,
or place.
yeah, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. So go through the hypothetical again of how you know you're not being poisoned in a restaurant. What are you doing? What
So
what
in
type
the
of things?
case, right, yeah. So I mean, without, I'm just going with it because I still don't understand because even though you clearly haven't shown like how this could be a working analogy for
I'm just
like I
asking a
don't know if it's
question.
a
I'm
yeah.
just asking a question. Just answer
So
it.
well, I mean, at this point you're just like kind of gish galloping, but I mean, for the sake
Okay,
of the
you've been
conversation, we'll
talking
go.
for
No, no,
like
we're gonna go with it.
10 minutes. Holy
But okay,
shit.
well,
I've gotten
yeah.
like
Well,
five
here's the
seconds
thing.
of
Well, I
speaking.
mean, you're the only one making questions, right?
I just asked you
You're
one
asking
question.
right, yeah, yeah. But just keep in mind, asking a question is not a claim. So don't be offended if
My
I'm the
God,
one
they're
that's
all bad
talking
faith.
and you're not.
It's such a simple
So let's get
question. It
back
doesn't
let's get
take
back to the
20
example,
minutes to
okay? All right.
explain.
So,
Yeah.
okay. How do I know that I'm not being poisoned at a restaurant? Well, given today's conventional standards, if I'm at a restaurant, right? Like where I live, there's going to be health codes involved, there's going to be regulatory bodies. So I can assume, right? I can reasonably assume that those health codes are met, right? And food is going to be safe for consumption. The environment, the way the food is prepared, is going to be, sanitary to some
Okay,
degree,
I
right?
understand what you're saying.
Now you get
Yep.
what I'm saying?
I understand.
But
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
those are
I know.
rational assumptions that I can
Yes,
hold
they are rational.
as an educated
I agree.
citizen
Yes, I
within
agree.
a democratic
I agree.
society and a financially liberal system
I agree.
where I can elect and choose to freely associate with one business versus another.
I agree.
So,
So,
yeah.
so yeah, I
So
agree.
if I wanted to widen my critical
Oh
approach
my
to
God.
not being poisoned at a particular restaurant, I might even go far as looking at the Google reviews, Yelp reviews, right? For
Yeah,
what
how
other
often do
people
you
say
do that?
about the establishment. Having done all of this,
No,
there's
not
still
yet.
no certainty that I'm not going to get poisoned. But I accept that risk. I accept that risk from a rational perspective.
Okay, yeah, I understand. So, you wouldn't go to someone's house that is sketchy and you wouldn't just take food from them because they don't have health standards, they don't have codes or whatever, right?
Again, so here's the
Why are
thing.
you oh my God, just say yes. Just let me make my point.
Well, that's the thing. You don't have a
Oh my,
point. You
okay,
just have questions. This
you're an
sounds like
idiot.
a if you're trying to run a script, this is a pretty weak script. But the problem is a lot of the times when you don't actually have a point and all you have are questions, right? Like just like, you can end up like leading a witness, quote unquote. Like I can just modify what I'm going to say as well, right? Which is at the end of the day, I could, if it's a friend's house, right? And it's not some stranger's house, right? I could probably, rationally assume or hold rational assumptions, right? Based on the relationship or the trust that I have in these people, that they're not going to poison me. But again, there's no 100% certainty. Oh, fuck, he left.